bit about our featured speaker today, another person I want to say thank you to. Thank you for doing this for us. Mr. Dan Perley, he was born in Ottawa, Canada, very appropriate for our Canadian military tribute today. We have a real live Canadian in captivity, right here. He was born in 1955. He spent most of his life there, except for a few years from 96 to 02, and then from 2009 to the present. He's currently living in Southern California. He holds a master's degree in public administration and transportation engineering from Carleton University in Ottawa. He worked for almost 42 years of his career in advanced technology and transportation and defense fields. I know he's Canadian because he spelled defense with a C. That's not something I was taught. Right? I knew you Canadians would appreciate that part. He's built several small consulting and systems integration firms. He's worked as an IT executive in larger firms and also as director of intermediate informatics with Transportation Canada. He is currently the co-owner of a consulting firm, Workplace Technologies Corporation in Long Beach. Dan is the author of 5 books, including 2 computer systems books published worldwide by McGraw-Hill. His hobbies include snowmobiling, which I have no idea what that even is here in Palm Springs, history, and the transportation simulation games. Why don't you please welcome our featured speaker today, Mr. Dan Perley. Thank you.
This thing is right? Okay. All right, we're good with gas. Well, thank you for coming. My wife and I were here about a year and a half ago, and I made myself a promise that I would do 2 things based on that very pleasant visit, that I would join this museum, which I'm going to be doing shortly. Barry didn't know that, it's an announcement. And also to come and give a speech about the Avro Arrow, one of my favorite subjects. So who here has ever heard of the Avro Arrow? How many people here are Canadian? Please, just saying. I'm going to talk about the Canadian aircraft industry. I'm going to talk about the history of Avro Canada, Avro Canada, the Arrow program, cancellation, what happened, the implications of that, what could have happened if we'd gone ahead with the airplane, and some questions and answers. If you have a burning question, interrupt. If you have a question pertaining to something I'm going to cover later, I'll defer it. But in general, I'll try to take questions at the end. Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Good. So some of the references for this, excuse me. I'm dealing with several physical challenges at the moment, so if I stop and get water down there and slow down, you'll please be sympathetic with me. The number of papers that have been published on the Avro Arrow, I gave this presentation on the 50th anniversary to the day of the cancellation back in 2009. It was cancelled February 20, 1959. I also gave a presentation on the 20th anniversary of the cancellation in Chicago at a defense conference. I'm hoping to publish my book, The Glenn Story, next year, which is all about what would happen in more detail than this if we had built the Arrow. And a number of books out there. There's a recent scholarship the last few years as well, 2 years I haven't put on here, but there's a lot of very interesting material on the Arrow that you can find on the web. If you search Avro Arrow, you'll find all kinds of neat stuff. So I'd like to thank my friend and colleague Carl Methodic for letting me use his beautiful graphics that you're going to see throughout this presentation. So here's a couple of points to ponder. 70% of all the R&D in Canada between 55 and 59 was related to the aviation sector and to Avro particularly. The first CF-105 straight-wing interceptor aircraft had only 10% Canadian content. The last one had 90%. To reach 50-hour test milestone initial flight qualification, the J75 engine for Pratt & Whitney cost $250 million. The vastly superior Iroquois engine for the Arrow was $90 million to do the same thing. So it was an efficient program. During World War II, there were a lot of things done in Canada to help aviation and come off the training plan. We built airplanes of various types. We had fundamental problems, such as Americans turned screws into the right, British turned screws into the left. And that was just the beginning of the challenges that we faced. In World War II, 120,000 Canadians worked in the aircraft industry, built the airplanes you see listed there, and others. country was 1/10 the population of the US at the time, I might add. The Avro Lancaster was by far the biggest, most complicated, most challenging airplane built in Canada during the war. We set up a company called Victory Aircraft just to build it, under license from Avro in the UK. Mostly known as the bomber, there were maritime control and other versions, even transport versions of the Arrow, the Lancastrian in New York, built during and after the war. Royal Canadian Air Force used it for patrol, search and rescue, mapping, and of course for bombing. So out of this activity of many different smaller companies, we created what we call a Crown Corporation in the government, and then that was sold to Avro, Avro in Britain. And they started working on a number of things, setting up the Avro Aircraft Company in Canada, and Arenda Engine, its twin company, which built engines for it and for other companies. So it was a vertically integrated enterprise. The Avro family of companies in Canada included all those firms. We'll focus mostly today on Avro and Arenda. Am I going too fast?
Yes, slow down.
Slow down a bit? Usually people say I'm going too fast. Sometimes they I'm going too slow. We'll see. So you may have heard of the CF-105, which was a straight-wing all-weather interceptor. First aircraft of its type to break the sound barrier. It could be used in the worst weather conditions you can imagine. We built over 700 of them. We exported them to Belgium. There were over 400 Canadian contractors. There was a 30,000 employment related to that program. Now, as the Soviets began to develop jet bombers and larger ones, there was concern in the early 50s that we needed to have a more powerful and faster interceptor, which could fire a lot more powerful weaponry at the bombers which could come across the North Pole and attack Canada and the United States. At this time, NORAD was being put together. So the RCF issued a new specification asking for some very demanding things, as you can see there, from the airplane. Not everybody was lining up to build this airplane, let me tell you what they're specifying. So ultimately, Canada decided to go ahead and do it ourselves. We went straight to a pre-production aircraft, a very complex aircraft with 38,000 parts. We started with the RD-106 engine, it was cancelled. We went on to the right big 67 engine, it was cancelled. Finally, we decided to build our, heck with it, we'll have our own aircraft on our own engine. We'll build it in Canada, we'll support it in Canada. We then won't have the problem of knowing we'll be able to shoot the engine up from under us, like we've already done twice. Well, so we did the normal things you do in the building aircraft program. We went through mock-up, metal, time shell, canopy testing, fuel system. We did a huge amount of research supporting every aspect of the aircraft. Everything in the airplane was brand new, not done before. The Arenda PS-13 Iroquois engine with a goal of 30,000 pounds of thrust right afterburner. Two of them, of course, you have 60,000 pounds of thrust in the airplane, made with the same weight. You have one-to-one ratio to take off and fly straight up. With this unconventional design engine with no center bearing, 20% titanium by weight, which was way higher than any other engine in the Western world at that time. We built our own vacuum furnace just to refine the titanium. We couldn't get the titanium as pure as we needed to get our own process. The weapon systems was another place where horses kept being shot out from under the Arrow. Originally started with the Great Corporation of Aircraft, the After system, then was developed in Blood. Weapon system became the four-way fracas, the RCF-105 Arrow system. The Centuries War one perpetuated, consolidated design, part of its production one to cut costs, and Avro wanted a weapon system that actually worked. Otherwise, you build an airplane if you can't shoot anything down with it, it's not much use, is it? So they went to the Sparrow program. Douglas started, the US Navy withdrew from that. They went onward to use an X-1179 Falcon missile and decided to go with that. There were more than 650 subcontractors to Avro and Arenda. Some of them are mentioned here. I worked for computing devices in the 80s for a while. I'll show you a few more. Huge amount of technology was developed from really a standing start from zero in many places. Many of these companies had white sheet of paper, an empty building when they started, a couple of engineers, and off they went and developed new technology in every direction. These companies, those of you who know aviation professionally are pretty much That's what name release the word now. I know in the automobile world, the business level system still enough. We mentioned the present company, and flight company, and the British cars, because it's a little higher quality in the aviation side, I think, than on the automotive side. RCA did keep involved in the program. There were probably 20 or 30 big high-tech companies, then high-tech companies involved in the program. 200 or 300 medium-sized ones and 300 or 400 small ones. There was no central program office in the Department of National Defense, DoD, or the Royal Canadian Air Force, which caused a lot of confusion. You had 4 or 5 people able to make changes to the airplane. The Air Force helped an Avro with 57,000 individual TCOs and entering change orders, specification change orders. The National Research Council got involved and didn't want to change this as well. The Defense Research Board, Defense Production Department. We had a large number of bureaucrats involved in all these different departments, counting on the head of the Air Force and the head of the people that were running Avro in Malton near Toronto. The United States was very helpful to Canada throughout the program. There were constant consultations on threat and interceptor needs. Wright Patterson, the Air Force Systems Command, gave us a lot of help. We were letting wind tunnels all over the country. We were actually landing electromagnetic pulse facilities as well, which I can't discuss because some of them are still classified. I guess one thing I forgot to mention in the introduction was after Gulf War I, Canada had to build a new electronic warfare center, and I ran the technical team to put that in place. Shortly after Gulf War I, the only program I ran that had no budget, it was designed to mission, not designed to cost. So, the Americans lent Canada B-47 to test the Arenda engine, and the test went very well. We were very thankful to have it. We didn't have a jet airplane that big in our Air Force at the time, so we were very thankful to have the use of it. So here's some basic facts about Avro and Arenda. Just the scope of the operation was, by Canadian standards, immense. Our population in Canada is about 1/10 out of the US, so if we had 60,000 people involved in the program, a similar sized program in the US would have 600,000 involved. So those are some of the facilities we had. Arenda, another 5,000 employees, Ellis Research developing their own capabilities. As I say, 60,000 people, 45,000 in subs and 15,000 in Avro and Arenda. About 60,000 altogether working on the program at the time of the cancellation. So the aircraft was rolled out in October of '57, first flew in March '58. Test program with 5 Mark I airplanes, which had an American engine, were going very, very well. The only official release on the timing, the speed of the airplane was, they said it exceeded 1,404 miles an hour while still climbing and still accelerating, which was a typically Canadian understated way of saying it goes a lot faster than that. About 2,000 miles an hour, in fact. RL-206, the first Mark III, would clearly have broken all speed and time to climb records with the Arenda engines having been installed. This is a Mark I airplane at a high, almost 45-degree angle of attack. Now, anything that gets funded by the government can get involved in politics. That's no news to anybody here. But the cost of this program was, by Canadian standards, enormous. It was starving the Air Force was starving the Navy of ships and starving the Army of new tanks, and there was a lot of bad blood among the 3 heads of the 3 armed services in Ottawa. There were deficits in the years 57, 89, where the government had significant deficits. And then John Diefenbaker, Conservative leader, was elected with a quite large majority, 205 seats. They made some changes. They dropped the more advanced fire control system, simplified the missiles. Yesterday has got another 375 mil for 100 units to be built. But there were additional ancillary costs. So what it really looks like is this. You can't read the bottom part very well, but we spent the money that's already colored on the left, the support missiles and the Mark I, Mark II pyramid. We were getting ready to spend the money that's across the bottom, 3 more bands there. That would be amortized or spread across a higher number of future airplanes, so we would not have lost all that money. We would support just 100. We could build 1,000 airplanes with that same base. The more you build, the lower the unit cost, right? So the government started attacking its own airplane, believe it or not, in the press. And Avro was trying to find out what the heck was going on, and then they were told, your lobbying is this, you shouldn't be in Ottawa visiting us, go back and read your contract and wait for us to tell you what to do. The NORAD alliance with the U.S. was broadening at the time. We were concerned about missiles as well as Soviet bombers coming across the north. Air Marshal Curtis pointed out that because Canada wasn't building its own aircraft back in World War II, we didn't have much to say about who got allocated about airplanes. And he argued strongly we should go ahead and build our own airplane. NORAD chiefs were on record as saying that they still needed an advanced interceptor, a heavy fighter, as well as missiles. We couldn't just rely on missiles. There was a little serious stuff. Even Aviation Week said, hey, the bombers are still out there, they can still come. We need increasingly powerful and fast and well-armed interceptors to attack them if they attack us. So along comes February 20th, without warning, the House of Commons, the Prime Minister stood up in the House of Commons and made a statement saying the Avro and the Arrow engine are cancelled. Now this led to a very strange series of events because the government almost changed its mind back at the last minute, then they panically started destroying everything to do with the program. The aircraft, cut metal, drawings, computer tapes, any kind of pattern or symbol. They even wanted to pull the model aircraft out of hobby shops. It got that extreme. So the Allies were shocked and somewhat horrified. The USAF and the UK Royal Aeronautical Establishment offered to buy the existing aircraft, sight unseen. They asked to license the Arrow engine. Avro had little or no other work. CF-100 production was winding down. So there was a big problem of how Avro was going to support itself for the next few years with the Arrow program. Somebody pulled out from under it. 60,000 jobs were lost. 15,000 were fired on one day. And Crawford Gordon, who ran Avro on a random, simply said, that's it, if the government's going to play hardball, I will play hardball, so I'll fire them all, it'll be a big political scandal, the government will have to hire them back, they'll have to give us more work. They didn't. And in my paper, which I gave in Chicago in 1979, I pointed out that every challenge that NATO faced after this had one less answer available to it because Avro was no longer there. Also, we used to have a policy by Canadian Canada. What happened to that? People were trying to ask. So let's talk about some of the myths about the Avro Arrow. Fighter aircraft are obsolete. Well, since the Arrow went down, more than 20,000 fighters and fighter interceptors have been built around the world, so fighters are not going away anytime soon. My wife and I were on the USS Theodore Roosevelt about a year and a half ago. We got to watch the F-18 launching and trapping. I'll tell you, there's nothing that you can do that's more exciting. Incredible. Fighter aircraft are going to be used for a while yet. Oh, they only fly 125 miles, so that's not true either. That was the range of the initial test airplanes. The Arrow's going to have far more range than that. The Arrow is too slow. Well, they quoted 1325 and they quoted 1404 miles an hour, but the simulation work I've done shows that the Mark 1 would go 2,000 miles an hour and the Mark 2 would have been considerably faster. Some people say the Arrow was too fast. This is a little bit, this is aviation week said, well, they had skin buckling problems on the Arrow, they're having heat problems flying that fast. There was nothing in the American inventory, unclassified at least, flying that fast, period. So it was a little bit kind of hypocritical to criticize the American airplane, the Bain airplane, when there was no American airplane that would go as fast. The Blackbird wasn't flying yet at this point, neither was the Y2. So there are physically induced speed limits, but we know that we can go Mach 3 or more. The Arrow is too big, not a dogfighter. It's heard this probably 100 times to know about the Arrow. Not all fighting is dogfighting. Sometimes you launch missiles from beyond visual range. So air superiority was important. You could have made a dogfighter out of the Arrow if you wanted to, but it was designed as a heavy fighter and interceptor. Go up there and shoot down the bombers with its mission. At least nobody said the Arrow was too small. The Arrow had no export potential. The real potential is when the aircraft is in service. You can't export an aircraft you aren't using yourself. So that was a real simple answer on that one. All we had to do was put the Arrow in service. And Belgium bought the CF-100, and I might point out that American foreign military sales credits were used to actually finance the sale of the Canadian CF-100 to Belgians. So Avro had already proven it in some airplanes outside the country. The Russians breach security. Well, yeah, but that's not a reason to cancel the airplane. There's a persistent story that one of the Mark III Arrows with the Renda engines got away and escaped being chopped up. It isn't true. I've looked at hundreds of photographs. I'd love to tell you that it's true, but it's not. The logical reality presented by the change of photographs makes clear all of the arrows are cut up. The front section of ones in Science Museum in Ottawa, about a third, look at 104, back to where the spinner is, the intake. But that much of the arrow is in the museum in Ottawa. Apart from that, it's all cut up. The Americans forced cancellation. Oh, the Yanks did it to us. Well, not really. First of all, the U.S. did, as I said earlier, a huge amount to aid the program from start to finish in all kinds of ways. They probably spent another couple $100 million helping us. So, yes, the airplane turned out a lot better than most people expected. The American aircraft industry was shocked and startled by the performance of the Arrow. They did some lobbying, but I don't think that was decided to cancel the airplane. Sadly, Canada did this to itself. U.S. lobbied against, some American companies lobbied against the CF-105 sale to Belgium. They were unsuccessful. American companies bought the Canada, the Viscount, the Caravel, and the Airbus A300 were all imported. The Concorde was permitted to serve JFK after it was blocked. So lobbying by the American aircraft industry hasn't always been as effective as some people say. The Arrow is too expensive. Well, we need to run 1,200 airplanes. If you put more in production, you sell them outside the country, you have a lower unit cost. Only government donated by pecuniary short-sighted leaders who believe such a ludicrous suggestion. There's no sadder story than what could have been. The future looking at the future. So, let's talk about the Arrow in more detail. I used some of the materials that are listed here to come up with a timeline for arrows being built from 1959 through to 1969 and beyond. I looked at every major international and national flight procurement in the Western world and reran all the procurements of the Arrow competing. I looked at various data sources. So, those are additional sources that I use. Nobody knows for sure what arrows would have been built because they weren't built in the designs. The advanced design material was largely destroyed. But we ran these competitions, and what if we stayed in production and went forward, what would have happened? So I'm going to do an overview, talk about the specs by version, I'm going to give you a sales calendar, I'm going to show some of the customers, I'm going to show you where the airplanes would have gone, squadron assignments, I'm going to talk to some of the economic benefits of the Arrow program, beyond the Arrow itself as well. Basic series with the Mark 1 to 7 and the Mark 9. Intermediate series had revised tail and fuselage and inlets, bubble canopy, the Mark 10 and 11. Super Arrow series, new nose, section, new inlets, and new wing, Mark 8 and the Mark 12 through 16. Now this format shows you the roll, the engine thrust, the speed. I won't call it all the numbers, but I'll try and go slow enough that you can read it as we go. So I'll talk about what was new in each section. Its gross weight, its armament, its general comments. So, how do we know this is true? Well, the ones that are green are factual because we have actual hard data because they were either designed and built and rolled out or in final release of engineering or under construction at the time of the cancellation. Gold, ones that were plan defined and partly designed or in advanced definition, everything else is shown as red. Let's talk about missiles for a second. Air missiles and air to surface. Kinds of guidance systems used. Take a look at that for a second. Some of these missiles are very large. So the original Arrow was the Mark 1, that's the one you saw a picture of earlier. Pre-production airplanes, 5 of them were for flight test and development. They were never intended to be flown in combat. These are the first 5. They had an American engine, J-105 Pratt & Whitney. Even despite the fact that this was the first generation of the airplane, it had tremendous performance potential. Gross weight 68,600 pounds, thrust up to 18,000 pounds per engine. Now, the Royal Aeronautical Establishment offered to buy completed arrows at the time of the cancellation, but what most people don't realize is they had already been negotiating for arrows separately before that. Before anybody knew the airplane was going to be canceled, the British Royal Aeronautical Establishment requested to have 2 more arrows produced at the Mark 1 level for them to use in research for different wiring and a number of other changes and various changes to British tooling standards for certain parts inside the airplane. Those airplanes were under contractual negotiation at the time the cancellation occurred. I don't believe this has been mentioned in public before. It was declassified about 10 years ago. So it's very much like the Mark 1 you saw a minute ago. Mark 2, the airplane people talk about most, the Arrow 206, the first Mark 2 was about to fly when they were all sliced up. And that's its basic information. We believe it would have been a world speed record contender, time to climb and cruise speed and dash speed. 2A was the first full production airplane. Added a fin fuel tank, 4 external hard points, and variable geometry fuel intake nozzles.
No.
Question? The Mark 2B was a development of flying display aircraft, used for demonstration, new canopy, strengthened landing gear. They did have a early problem with landing gear in Mark 1. It was too late to change to Mark 2, but they decided that they would have landing gear changes in the subsequent submarks of Mark 2 to give it a more stable undercarriage. Compare the Arrow to the Voodoo, which Rocan ultimately bought for its interceptor. Voodoo was much older design, single low seat versions, did not meet the performance goals, vastly inferior to the Mark 2 Arrow. F-102, limited use, not nearly the airplane the Arrow was in any sense of the imagination. Instructor planing, purely a fighter, good acceleration, 2 engines, suffered from range constraints, not widely used outside the UK, although the Saudis did buy it. Arrow Mark 3, advanced interceptor, heavy fighter, new engine, improved performance, variable geometry inlets. It's still in basic shape. 3B, minor revisions to Mark 3 for Belgium. We think Belgium would have been an early customer. They were very happy with their CF-100s. The Canadian Navy had shore-based airplanes at the time as well as carrier-based airplanes, and the landed ship version of the Arrow was definitely a possibility. So this was, and this also was mooted, reduced payload and more range, obviously, for oceanic work. Same thing for the Royal Navy with minor changes in British fire control. Check the years on the top left, year of production. Mark 3F, air superiority fighter, new wing, new leading edge slats, more maneuverable. Canards, new inlets, and updated fly-by-wire control system, flight control. Mark 4, operational trainer, dual control, trades payload for range, also VIP transport role if you have a politician that wants to go from Ottawa to Montreal or Ottawa to Halifax in a hurry. We have the 412 Squadron in Ottawa, which is the VIP transport squadron that keeps to have it and used in the Air Force Base for the Americans, residential flight, all that. A politician has to go somewhere very quickly to get there, very quickly in an Avro Arrow. Mark 5, the Reconnaissance version, increased outer wing fuel, high energy fuel, landing gear modifications for a heavier weight, 105,000 pound airplane. Mark 5 IR for the Israelis, Israeli avionics and fire control, otherwise similar to the Mark 5. Mark 6, new engine, new leading edge slats, considerably evolved airplane. Mark 7, single seat fighter, 4 sidewinders, 4 red tops, upgrade to the Mark 3, new engine inlets, new fire control system. Demonstration aircraft, air battles, that sort of thing, target tow. 7B, 2-seat fighter, 2-seat version of the Mark 7. For export, Israeli airplane with their avionics. Single seat fighter for the RAF, British radar and fire control missiles, Two-seat RAF fighter, Mark 7D. Single-seat fighter for the American Air Force. This would have done serious damage to the MiG-21 in Vietnam, I contend. Four-side runners, four red tops, US avionics, fire control and radar. Obviously, would have been deployed to Vietnam. 7G single-seat fighter, run a 5-engine to you out of new, more fuel-efficient engine. Sorry. Mark 7H, two-seat fighter, interceptor. Two-seat derivation of the 7G. Long-range version for the Royal Canadian Navy. Derived from the Mark 7. Sidewinders and EW electronic warfare package. Two-seated Russian aircraft to simulate Russian MiG-25s for combat exercises like Top Gun, that sort of thing, red flag. Intelligence airplane, I covered in black, CIA, whatever, high energy fuel, air refueling for long range. Some people call it the Spook Arrow. Super Arrow Mark 8, nuclear armed, first generation airplane, responds to the Mark 6 structural issues. Mark 9, a glass first generation Arrow. This is obviously an aerobatic limousine airplane. Mark 10, new cockpit engine, fire control, first intermediate generation Arrow. 10A, British fire control system avionics for the RAF. 10B, Mark 10 flown with British fire control for the Belgians. Dual control trainer airplane. Two-seat trainer, British avionics. Target tug, also for VIP transport role. Two-seater, of course. Two-seat fighter for Germany. Short field capable. Revised airplane for the Americans. Mark 10 trainer. Mark 10W, radar, Wild Weasel, some of the RF-4G Wild Weasel. Well, it's that. It took the Russians a long time to come up with an airplane anywhere close to the Avro Arrow. Capable airplane, significant engine problem, not nearly as sophisticated as any of the early Arrows, much less the later ones. F-15, Mach 2 airplane plus, flying some close-in range capabilities, major rework out of ground attack though. Smaller weapons platform with less power than the Arrow. Mirage F1, single engine. How many pilots want to get over the Arctic Ocean with a single engine? Not many. 1,600 airplane. Smaller weapons platform with less power than the Arrow. F-16, single engine. Limited all-weather role. Vastly inferior performance to the Arrow. Smaller weapons platform. Single engine again. Mark 11, two-seat reconnaissance, long-range high-altitude mission. Mark 12, single-seater fighter, new generation fighter, new nose, new engine, revised inlets and nozzles. Very fast moving, 350. 12A, revised avionics and fire control. 12B, single-seat long-range fighter, trades payload for range. 12C, revised cockpit, improved visibility, double cockpit. 13, tactical nuclear role, short-range strike in Europe. 14, new, more efficient engine, revised fuselage ultimate fighter version. Revised nose section, new sensors optimized for max range. Optimized for max speed. Sort of a junior AWACS. This shows what I believe some of the sales would have been the early time. I think Australia would have been our first foreign customer, with the United States coming up long after. New Zealand, the Luftwaffe in Germany, possibly the Austrians, Canadian Navy. Top CF-105 customers estimated to be those. Here's a breakdown of production of the various marks of red ones are the heavily produced ones. So, in 59, Canada had about 40 squadrons, 30 combat capable. 30 combat capable were 12 in Europe, 8 in Canada, and 10 reserve in Canada as well. So that was a 30 squadron, combat air force, 40 squadrons altogether. We had, excuse me. So I'm dealing primarily with the 30 that were combat capable from here forward. Silent methodology was work about with the operation training development units pulled in Alberta, and then flow the Mark 2As and the Mark 3s up with the squadrons. I won't spend too much time on this because it's kind of internal Air Force administration stuff. I'm just to say that the airplanes would have gone in service as quickly as they were built. You can see where the airplanes were going. So this populates by 75. We have 60 squadrons instead of 30. 24 combat capable, 15 reserve, 6 ground attack squadrons, 10 training, 5 reconnaissance with the Arrow. After all, we did do a little over 1,000 copies, or 700 copies of the CF-100, so 1,000 to 1,200 copies of the Arrow was by no means unreasonable. These are where they would have gone squadrons in different places. I won't belabor this too much except to say they would all throughout Canada and Europe on their NATO commitments. Of course, there's something more added from here. I show the later aircraft from Mark 7, 8, and 9 onward, displacing the older airplanes in the reserves, which of course is the normal way things happen in the military. So these numbers are, I think, reasonable within the context of the program. After all, the Phantom sold 5,000 copies, and if the Arrow had been around all through the 60s, I suggest the Phantom would have sold way fewer airplanes than they actually did in real history. So the Arrow economic benefits, the gross revenue at 7 million per copy, 6,279 units would have been 43.9 billion in 1959 money, about 439 billion in current money. Foreign exchange earnings, 351 billion. Employment, 120 billion. 60,000 jobs over 20 years. I didn't even expand the program, I just left it at 60. It probably would have got bigger. I postulated a mild stretch to the Arrow to get a light bomber, heavy fighter. A new airplane entirely coming up behind that. And then further development as a second new gen airplane. Also the Avro jetliner, which some of you may have heard of. Canada built the world's second jet transfer airplane. It flew only 10 days after the Comet did. So here's what I call the CB-107 Giraffe. It's a 3-seater. Pilot, navigator, and bombardier. Starting real close to 100,000 pound airplane. Mark II over that. New engine and improved cockpit. Mark III and IV identical externally to the Mark I and II, the Mark II, pardon me. Estimated production. Customers. Canada was never a big nation for bombing other than World War II, so I didn't see us flying too many bomber. The Saudis would buy some, I think. So the next generation airplane, called the Sunbeam, this airplane would be still in production today. I believe it would have been built. Mark II. Mark III revised avionics and cargo control. Here's the Eurofighter Typhoon. Twin engine, very agile, all weather, good thrust-to-weight ratio, much slower than the Avro products, vastly inferior performance in terms of grip speed, climb range, and payload. Lockheed Martin F-22A, twin engine, very agile airplane, extremely complex to build and support, high unit cost, I'm trying to say is life of the airplane was limited by certain aspects of the airframe design. High unit cost, over $70 million a copy. I think the 109 would still be in production if it proceeded with. This is a concept developed by somebody on the internet, which I thought was fun, so I've played with it. This is the CF-105 airplane, which first flew back in 1949-50. It didn't get into full production. It was shown to the Americans. Several airlines, including TWA, wanted to buy it. Howard Hughes took it for a test flight. Didn't want to give it back. It took Avro a couple of weeks of negotiation to get the American government to part the airplane out of the hands of Howard Hughes and give it back. He never actually did ordering. This postulates the evolution of the C-102 jetliner over the 60s. I'm not going to go through all the technical details here because it gets quite into detail, and I think you get the idea that I'm talking about, again, airplanes that could have been built but were not built. So I'm just going to step very quickly through the evolution of the airliner, watching the time as well. Starting with 50s technology, fuselage and wings, evolving into the 60s with bigger engines and stretches. Medium range airplane. Here's a more of a 70s, 80s design with rear-mounted engines and a partial T-tail. And again, a junior AWACS. This is more of the 80s, 90s sort of airplane. Same base, same core fuselage. Off the sides, about 2,500 of those being built altogether. So let's talk lessons learned. National security cannot be procured on the cheap. Canada does not, in my personal opinion, does not do its fair share in helping out the United States defend the free world. In many countries, freeload on the U.S. in terms of defense commitment, but Canada can get away with it for way too long. I think we should pay our fair share. Fighters are not obsolete in '59, they're not obsolete today. Canceling the Avro Arrow was the single biggest political, economic, and technical blunder in history, bar none. It caused an industrial turnaround and contraction in Canada that's still going on today, 50 years later. It was not the Russians, it was not the Americans, it was the Canadians that did this to themselves. If we want to remain an independent country down the years, we have to maintain basic capabilities, including food, clothing, shelter, transportation, communications, and yes, defense. Thank you.